Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for attending today's Planning and Development Management Committee today, the 29th of April 2020. This is the first time we've done a virtual online planning committee. It's the first committee we've done and it is fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for coming along. Before we go into the proceedings for today, I would like to say a few words regarding the passing and a tribute to Councillor Bob Band. Whilst I realise that further tributes for Councillor Bob Band will be held at future meetings, as this is the first meeting to be held since his death, I want to acknowledge in particular the significant contribution he's made over many years to the work of Perth and Kinross Council as a planning authority. He served on this committee and on the former development management committees in several previous administrations over many years, and including a spell as its vice convener. He was also the first councillor to be appointed by the council as the convener of the local review body when that process came into being in 2009. He was always a conscientious, constructive and courteous contributor, and he will be missed. On a personal note, as a newly elected member in 2017, he was a gracious and helpful colleague who was happy to put party politics aside and help a fellow councillor find her feet. He was a gentleman and I will always remember him as such. Thank you. I believe that Councillor Lane would also like to say a word. Councillor Lane.
Thank you very much, Convener. And yes, you stated the great work that Bob did within the council. When I was a new councillor, I was fortunate enough to be in the same room as Bob Band and shared it with him for 8 years. Bob's passing isn't just a massive loss to his family. He's also a massive loss to us as the SNP family, but he's also a massive loss to the Perth and Kinross family as well. And once we come out of this, I hope that we can have a proper send-off for Bob, everybody together. He did a lot of work. He was gracious. He was one of the in the chamber. He was one of the least political people when it came to making decisions, and he would help anyone. He certainly helped me for 8 years, and often managed to talk me down. I think that he's sadly missed by everybody, and I know that there'll be other councillors, including Councillor Wilson, who've known him for a lot longer than I, would want to speak to him. And I'm grateful for you giving me the chance to speak about Bob. It was his humanity, the way that he broke the news of his illness to us, and the way that he bore his illness all the way through, turning up to committee meetings, etc., never losing his sense of humour. If some of us, if I could face what he faced with half the humility and strength that he did, I'd be proud. It was a wonderful example to us all. So thank you for letting me make that statement.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Okay, that said, we now go on with the normal proceedings, and it's my normal job to introduce the top table, so to speak. Now, obviously we're not on a top table, but I will go through them anyway. So we have Mr. Christian Smith from the Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager. Online we also have Mr. Jamie Scott, Planning and Development Team Leader. We have Councillor Bob Braun, who is the Vice Convener of Planning and Development. Mr. Jeff Fogg, who's here from Legal Management, and Mr. Scott Hendry, who is here from Committee Services. Now, I have to remind members that if you have to leave the meeting at any point, you will not be able to participate in any vote that might come up. So it is important that we treat this as if it was any other meeting, and that we listen to all parts of the discussion and come to the right, come to the decision at the end. So I know we're not all in the one room, but if you could all please stay where you are, so that we can actually process these applications correctly. Okay, now I would also like to, we've gone over this a couple of times, but I'd like to say, could we please use the chat box to allow me to see who would actually like to make a comment or raise a question. I I'm unable to actually see everybody. As we know, I can only see a couple of councillors at a time. So if you have any questions at all, could you please put that into the meeting chat box and I will direct the question to you when it is time. Okay, could I ask could I ask Scott, please, to advise the members participating today to go through the attendance, please. I'll pass it over to Scott. If you could just go through everybody, and if you could please record your name so that we can actually have that correctly minuted. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Just to confirm, we have apologies today from Councillor Barnacle, and we have substitution from Councillor Bailey, and we also have Councillor Lang attending for the vacant position on the committee. When I read out members' names, could they just say yes to confirm that they are in attendance? Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
We have a yes in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind, so that we know that the microphones are all working, if you could unmute your microphone and actually say yes, that would be helpful.
Yes, present. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Braun.
Present.
Councillor Drysdale.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Yep, present.
Councillor Lang.
Present.
Councillor McCall, I know you're present. Councillor Purvis.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Waters.
Present.
And Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Wilson's just dropped off. We're just trying to get back on.
Okay.
Okay. Apologies. I think Councillor Gray, I think I missed you out. Just to confirm, you're also present.
Councillor Gray, could you just say yes again, please?
Yes, present.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, convener. All present except Councillor Wilson at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Scott, for that. Hopefully, Councillor Wilson will be in very shortly. This would be the point where I would ask for declarations of interest. If there are any declarations of interest from any members of the committee, could you please write DI in the chat box right now, and then I will come to you and you can inform the committee of your interest. Okay, we have had none so far, so I will take that there are no declarations of interest on the proceedings in front of us today. Okay, normally we would have deputations. We have had no request for deputations today, so we don't have that in front of us. So I don't need your approval for that. And that takes us on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous Planning and Development Management Committee, which was on the 11th of March. Again, normally I would ask for everybody to agree the minutes, but that would then mean a complete round of everybody asking or shouting out agree. So I'm going to do it the other way around and say that if anybody has any comments or concerns regarding the minutes of the previous meeting, could they please put a C in the chat box right now? And then I will come to you. And if I have received no request for that, then I will take it that the minutes are accepted. Wonderful. We have had no requests, so I take it that the minutes are actually accepted. Can I now ask, because we would now be coming to the applications, is Councillor Wilson on the committee?
He isn't at the moment.
Right. I will need to proceed with the major applications that they're coming forward and proceed with the work of the day, which means we will be moving on to the first application, which will also mean, depending on how quickly he comes in, Councillor Wilson might not be able to take part in any vote that comes up regarding this. Okay, we now move on to the major applications in front of us. The first application is 511. It is the erection of 246 dwelling houses, formation of vehicular accesses, play park, landscaping and associated works. Approval of matters specified in conditions 18.02213 on land 200 metres southwest of Wiltshire Foods on Broik Road in Crieff. And I would like to ask Mr. Scott to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'll take you and members through some stills as normal, just highlighting the proposals and the context of the application site. So taking you to the first plan, this is just to confirm the site location. It's located in the southwest of Crieff, off and south of Broik Road. As noted in the report, planning permission in principle was approved in December 2015 and again in June 2019 for the wider site. This site is a wider site, is also allocated within Local Development Plan 2 as site MU7, and it's allocated for an indicative number of 409 to 639 dwellings and 5 areas of employment land. The current application before us today is seeking approval of matter specified in condition for the erection of 246 dwellings. That site in itself is 11 hectares in size, and that forms the western part of the planning permission in principle site. The next still I'll show you is an aerial photograph. So this is again just to confirm its context. So to clarify for members and people watching, the application site today is noted in red. So that's the approval of matter specified in condition boundary. And the yellow boundary is the extent of the planning permission in principle boundary. So in terms of the site itself, as I've noted, it's to the southwest of Crieff and south of Broik Road. So just to be clear, between the two proposed site accesses on the plan, which you'll see from the red juttings at the north of the site, they're commercial premises currently in operation. On the other side of Broik Road, there is a new commercial premises. I'll allude to that later. That's the Aldi food store. Further down Broik Road to the east, there is also the primary school. On the application boundary on the northwest, you'll notice that there is a caravan park, and just to the north of that, there are a row of dwellings on Broik Road. On all other boundaries, there are mature tree planting, and beyond that is agricultural land. Moving now to the site plan. This will allow members to see the proposal. So just to highlight, as alluded to earlier, there are two access proposed off Broik Road, which would serve the development. The westmost access would be the main access, which would form part of the first phase, and the eastern access would be forming part of a later phase. Beyond that, there's an arterial road network which goes through the site, and beyond the road network, there are several pathway connections proposed on the north, east, south and west boundaries to connect to wider countryside walks. Of the total of 246 dwellings that are proposed on the site, this would equate roughly to an indicative dwelling, 22 dwellings per hectare, which is regarded as a medium scale development. The proposal also includes in excess of 3,000 square metres of open space with the associated play area and a SUDS provision, which is noted on the central and eastern part of the site. Beyond that, there's complementary and supplementary landscaping throughout the site proposed with significant structural planting to provide buffers and landscape integration, notably on the western boundary with the caravan site. Moving now on to the next plan. This is a phasing plan, so it's just to give members an impression of the proposed phasing of the development, which is proposed over 4 phases. It's to commence in the northwest quadrant of the site, which also, as I alluded to earlier, includes the western access, which will serve the first part of the development. Thereafter, it's going to progress in the counterclockwise direction, so it'll be southwest for phase 2, southeast for phase 3, and northeast finally for phase 4. At that point of phase 4, the eastern access will also come on stream. You'll also note on this plan that the dwellings are indicated, just to clarify, that the dark grey dwellings are the affordable housing provision and the light grey are the open market provision. So just to clarify that the affordable housing are split almost equally over the 4 phases, and you'll note that there are provision within phase 1. Similarly, the open space, play area and SUDS would also form part of phase 1A of the development. I'll now take you through some photographs of the site and its context. This photo shows the western approach to the site along Broich Road. As alluded to earlier, to the left of shot is now the completed Aldi supermarket. It was under construction at this point. To the left and north, you'll see that, to the right and north, you'll see that there is a commercial premises. So that's actually the commercial premises which are currently occupied to the north of the site, and I'll clarify later the arrangements for that going forward. So that's a dairy and a food processing plant, and further beyond the Aldi site, there's Crieff Primary School, which is visible just in the near distance. The next photo is taken from the approximate location of the western access on Broich Road. So this is located between Curry View, which is the dwelling house on the right of shot, and the existing commercial premises, which are just on the left of shot. So that would be where the first access as part of phase 1 is proposed. Moving to the next photo. This is where the second access would be proposed on the eastern part of the site, again on Broich Road, which would form part of phase 4. So this access is to the east of the existing dairy facility. The mature trees that you see visible mark the eastern boundary of the application site, and the remainder of the planning permission and principal site, and indeed the wider MU allocation, is also beyond. The next photo refers to the aforementioned dairy business. So as noted in the report, this business and the other nearby commercial use are located within the wider allocated site. Ultimately, the intention is for these businesses to cease operation, and thereafter the site would become available for future potential development, as the applicant has noted in their design and access statement. But that would come part as a separate planning application and does not form part of the proposal today. Moving now to photos within the site. This is a photo taken from the northwest corner of the site, looking across to the southeast. So you'll see generally there's a gradual slope of ground southwards is visible, downwards and towards the southern direction. The mature trees on the eastern, which is to the left of the shot, and southern, which are the centre of the shot, mark the existing boundaries for this application, and they are to be fully retained as part of this proposal. Moving now to the opposite side of the site, this photo is a view from the northeast corner, looking back across the site to the southwest. So the River Erne is some 200 to 300 metres beyond the southern boundary, and that's again marked by the woodland that you can see in the distance. Now, moving to the last photo, it's also taken from within the site, and this is the northeast corner again, but this time showing the view of the western boundary. You can see clearly at present Arnbro Caravan site, which is visible. Within this part of the site, the proposal includes a significant structural planting buffer of up to 18 metres on the mutual boundary, and there's going to be a further offset beyond the gardens. So essentially, there's going to be a degree of containment proposed as part of the site to separate the proposed residential development from the existing caravan site. Just to the right of shot, which is just out of shot, was properties located on Broich Road, and this now takes us back to the proposed site plan, which now concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott, for that. We now open it up for questions to officers regarding the application. Again, I would like to remind councillors to do that. Could you please put a Q in the chat box? That will attract my attention to the fact that you have a question, and I will then refer that to yourself. We have the first question forward by Councillor Braun. Councillor Braun, please, could you ask your question?
Good morning, convener. Actually, I have a couple of questions. Do you want me to separate them off or just do them all at once?
I'm happy for you to do. How many questions do you have? If you don't mind me asking?
Just three. Two are linked together, and there's a third one. That's all. So
then you can ask your 3 questions.
Okay, my question relates to page 36, paragraph 100. Initially, this is the question regarding the electric vehicle charging points. I'm just wondering, are they going to be located close to the flats, which are going to be part of affordable housing? And that's the specific one for this. And the other question, a general one, is that I noticed, are we now conditioning for electric vehicle charging points to be included in major developments? So that's a supplementary to that bit. But the main concern was, are the charging points going to be close to the flats, which is obviously where they'll be needed, I suppose. That's my first question.
Thank you for the question, Vice Convener. I can just clarify that at present we don't have the specific details for the electrical vehicle charging points, but we are recommending a planning condition, which I believe is noted as condition 27 on the recommendation, which will see details coming forward for our approval. So the position within the local development plan does seek to provide an essentially future-proof for further future vehicle movement. So that is a plan that's still to come forward and will ensure an appropriate provision on the site.
Thank you. And the second question really was, with the coming of Aldi opposite, that will attract obviously a lot of traffic, not just from Crieff, but I would think from surrounding areas. Are we happy with that the Broik Road can actually take the volume of traffic of that plus this development? And would there need to be or anything considered for any form of traffic control at the entrances to the site, bearing in mind the increased volume on that road?
Thank you very much for your question, Bob. It's actually Lachlan that would like to answer that question. Lachlan McLean, could you please answer the question, please?
Thank you, Convener. Traffic modelling has been undertaken along the Broik Road and covering the Crieff wider area, which led us to implementing the signals at the end of Burrell Street, King Street and Gallow Hill. So work has been done to undertake an assessment of all the sites. It was done cumulatively. We've also, the traffic and network team have been working on a footway on the northern side. So there's a 3-metre footway which will continue from the primary schools all the way up to Duckledge Road at the moment.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, you have a question.
Thank you. I have maybe one or two questions concerning the trees, depending on how the answers go. Firstly, the trees in the eastern boundary, are they in the ownership of the developer?
I can just confirm that the vast majority of the trees are not in the ownership of the developer. I believe it's approximately 9 trees, predominantly located in the southern part of the western boundary, that are entirely located within the application site.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can I follow on?
Certainly.
Yes, my concerns is the tree survey. Quite a few of the trees have only are judged to have a lifespan of 20 years. And I think there'll be quite a bit of overhanging by 20 years of the gardens in that area. How is there any way we can have these trees maintained over 20 years, or is this going to be the responsibility of whoever buys these gardens to ensure that limbs and that are looked after? And so they're not likely to cause damage to these houses?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Anderson. Yes, so those trees are essentially all out with the ownership of the applicant, so there isn't any direct control as part of this planning application that we can have over those trees. It would ultimately be the responsibility of the landowner. However, just to clarify, within the landscaping proposal as part of this application, the developers are not seeking to remove or impede any of these trees, and indeed we're recommending planning conditions that all trees are actually being retained and there's to be protective fencing during the period of construction. I appreciate moving forward that situation can change, but it isn't something that can directly be controlled. But we're satisfied that the standoff distance in terms of where the houses are, that they're satisfactory, and in future it would be for the landowner to review what their intentions are for those trees.
Lastly, can I just say that therefore the recommendation for crown lifting and cutting back on the southwest boundary, that isn't in our gift to have a condition that's done before building in that area.
In terms of potential crown lifting, so the report from the tree, the tree report does indicate that the trees would benefit from that. It isn't actually part of the proposal. My understanding that's definitely going to happen. However, within the recommendation that we do have a requirement within condition 12, I believe it is, that we're essentially looking at the trees to make sure there are no protected species, etc. If it was thought appropriate, we could say prior to commencement of development or any works on trees on or over the site, it would be essential to see what details would come forward, to see what works are actually going to be undertaken to the trees. But at this point, the landscaping plan doesn't actually note any removal of trees or any crown lifting, etc. But we could seek those details through that condition if it was thought appropriate.
Thank you. That's I'll leave others to question on other matters, but thank you for that answers to my question. And I hope this went all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Gray, you're next.
Thank you, Convener. The
pedestrian crossing proposed across Broy Road. In condition 4, it mentions perhaps plural. What was the inference there? Where would the plurality come from? Is it 1 or 2 or 3 crossings proposed?
Yeah, I think at this point in time, we're recommending the approval on the basis that at least a crossing is required, but depending on the nature and extent of the scheme, it may include, say, a formal crossing in terms of a pelican crossing or another type of crossing. So it's leaving the possibility open that there might need to be more than one crossing. So that scheme is still to come forward, and when it does, we'll be able to confirm the details appropriately with our roads colleagues.
Did this, can I just, did this have to be a question that Councillor Braun asked?
It wasn't my understanding. Councillor Braun's question was regarding the volume of traffic on the Broik Road, more than the number of crossings.
Sorry. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Are you happy with the answer,
Yeah,
Councillor Gray? Okay. Next for questions we have Councillor Purvis, followed by Councillor Waters. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. I have 2 separate questions, so if I may, I'll ask them separately and get an answer after each if possible. The first one is on health provision, and I have raised this issue, and I know others have before in the past. There is a concern that obviously during the LDP2 process, it seems NHS Tayside weren't very active in participating in that development plan process, and didn't give any information on many of the sites, if any of the sites in LDP2. And we've often had instances where the view of NHS Tayside, the board, is different from the view of the local GP practices, which are mainly run by partners in Perth and Kinross. So I suppose my concern is that in the report, it says that there has been no assessment specifically on the impact on local health infrastructure because no need was identified in LDP2. My concern is that the health assessment in LDP2 may well have been deficient because of the lack of information from NHS Tayside, and I was under the impression that we were looking to be more proactive with NHS Tayside going forward, and that NHS Tayside were going to start bringing forward more information to try and help ensure that we assess the health infrastructure needs fully in future.
Yeah, I believe that Mr. Scott's going to come in and answer that. Yeah, I'll let Mr. Scott answer that first.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Purvis. So yes, I believe you're referring to paragraph 133 in the report, which is on page 41 of the papers. So that summarises the position that this application, there is planning permission in principle in place from 2015, and again it was approved in 2018. So as part of that process, and indeed the allocation of the site within the first local development plan and the second local development plan too, there hasn't been any comment from NHS Tayside. So on the principle of our working arrangements with NHS Tayside, that there aren't any comments coming forward as part of the proposal. Because the site is now allocated, it is a firm position that it wouldn't be appropriate to review any health implication matters, given the site does have planning permission in principle. Indeed, this development coming forward falls significantly below the maximum indicative number that's allocated. Should that reach that point or extend it, certainly we would need to seek confirmation as to whether there are any impacts, but in the absence of any comment, we don't have any concerns about any health impacts or known health impacts for provision of services within CREEF.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. I am well aware of the frustration from the committee that the NHS do not engage as well as we would like regarding these applications. It is something that is mentioned very often when we have meetings. It is something that I know that the planning department try and chase regularly, but we cannot hold up applications because NHS aren't responding. It is chased, it is something that is commented on, and it is something that we actively as a planning department work hard to gain any access or information from the NHS, but we do have applications to process. So I do know that frustration is there, and I do think we all have to work together to try and sort this situation as best we can. But I just wanted to recognise that particular point that it is actively worked on within the planning department. Councillor Purvis, you have another question.
Thank you for those responses, and I do appreciate that the planning department does make every effort to try and get information from NHS Tayside. I suppose the concern is just, as I made the point, that sometimes there are different views between the local GP surgeries. We've seen that recently with the Pitdownies application versus the view or non-view of NHS Tayside. So I just think it's something that we do need to see if there's another better way of doing that in future, but perhaps that can be picked up through the member officer working group. My second question was on the contaminated land. I'm just wondering, was this a specific issue to this site that was identified in the planning permission in principle? Because it says that SEPA removed their objection or didn't have an objection once further information was submitted. I was just wondering, was there a specific concern that was raised, and also how's that been mitigated? If you could give some more detail on that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Purvis. I have both Mr. Scott and Mr. Smith who wish to make a comment on that. So we'll start with Mr. Scott and then we'll go to Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so at this stage, we obviously didn't know the extent or scale or location of the exact development of planning permission principles. So there was a condition requiring a contamination and geotechnical survey, which has been submitted. It's now being considered by the Council's Land Quality Officer and SEPA, and both are satisfied. In essence, it's agricultural land, so there is a very low, there is a nil risk of any contamination. It was just in case part of the proposal were coming forward in a more sensitive area. So to the northeast corner of the site, you'll see that there was a former sheep dip, which forms part of the planning permission and principal site. That specific locality, which is out with this application site, is likely to have more potential for contamination. So going forward, it would require further investigation, but this site in itself is very clean and clear of any contamination.
And yes, Mr. Smith, I believe you have a comment to make on that.
That in the chat box there was really if there was further response required in relation to the health provision question, that I could have covered that, but I think we've dealt with that perhaps.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Purvis, are you do you have any follow-up? Are you happy with the answer?
No, thank you for those answers. Just if it could be noted, perhaps convener yourself, if we could maybe look at that health issue further in the MOG if possible.
Absolutely, happy to. It is a concern for many councillors and myself included. We know the knock-on effect, and I'm more than happy to spend more time again looking at this and seeing what it is we are actually able to do to fix this situation. So thank you very much for mentioning it. Councillor Waters, I believe you're next, and then Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, convener. Just got a question on the landscape and specifically on the buffers around the site. Where the vast majority of the site will have a good buffer enclosing the site. At the very northwest corner, up near the houses at Curryview, Braylossie, Balgowan and Maxwell houses, it's probably one of the few bits of the site, or certainly the most extended bit of the site, where there's no buffer, where I would have thought the potential benefits of having a buffer there, with some landscaping and some trees to protect the amenity of the residents of these houses. I just want to ask officers if you've considered and looked at that and chatted with the developer and what the reasons are behind it.
Mr. Scott, could you answer the question, please?
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Yes, in reviewing the proposals, the original submission, there's quite a lot of effort has gone into bringing forward what is in front of you as a revised proposal, which does enhance and increase the buffers, as you've noted, on many boundaries. In the specific locality in the northwest of the site, it does appear close, and certainly is fairly close to the mutual boundaries with the property in that locality, notably I think Maxwell, Balgowan, Braylossie and Curryview. However, in the northwest corner, those dwellings are actually orientated in a way that where there are no windows located on the common boundary. There is a few metres standoff from the boundary, and from the common boundary itself, it's approximately 25 metres across garden ground to the property. So we're satisfied from an amenity perspective or any daylight sunlight perspective. There aren't any concerns, and therefore we didn't feel there was a specific need for landscape planting or buffing in that particular locality. Whereas in other parts of the site, such as the caravan site, given the nature of that use, it was more appropriate.
Right, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Waters? Yes.
Yes, I'm happy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Bailey, followed by Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. When checking the documents out prior to the meeting, I noticed that our objector in this case makes a reference to three-storey buildings and flats specifically. I was wondering, could officers indicate if there are any three-storey buildings, three-storey plus roof, I guess I mean, and if so, whereabouts are those on the site plan, please? Any three-storey buildings?
Mr. Scott, could I ask you to answer the question, please?
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. So yes, I believe the one letter of representation, the person resides in that northwest corner that was just referring to in the answer to Councillor Waters' question. Just to clarify, there are no three-storey properties proposed anywhere on the site, and specifically in that location and elsewhere there are a maximum of 2 stories, and there are some bungalows elsewhere. So no, it's a traditional 2-storey property on those properties within that locality, and indeed elsewhere in the site there are no 3-storey properties.
Thank you. That confirms my reading of the maps, but I just wanted to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Wilson, and then I believe I thought I saw a message up from Councillor Drysdale, but it doesn't seem to be showing on my chat. If Councillor Drysdale wishes to ask a question, could you please put another cue back into the chat box? Thank you. Councillor Wilson, can we have your question?
Convener, good morning and thank you. My abject apologies for being late. Thank you for the IT team who helped rescue me and get me in. We managed after a lot of effort to get the connection. On this particular application, a couple of questions. On the map that we see before us, there's a road that goes through what is I think the commercial area, the industrial area, and leads into the proposed development. What I couldn't quite fathom out from the report what mitigation measures there will be to prevent commercial vehicles coming in. Now, this may have been asked earlier, Convener, and if it is, I apologise. I can get the answer later, perhaps. But I just wonder the mix of domestic traffic and commercial vehicles. I wonder what has been done to try and ameliorate that. That's my first question, and I'll keep the second one for a moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Mr. Scott, could you answer the first question, and then we'll go back to Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, there is an access already serving those 2 commercial premises, which is unaffected by this proposal. The new access to the site are out with those, so there would be no need or indeed benefit from commercial vehicles using the access to the site in phases 1 or 4 because they only lead into the residential development. In time, the intention is for the cessation of these commercial premises. I believe the lease is currently held with the landowner that owns the site which is before us today, and it's intended for these commercial premises to vacate that locality and perhaps move to the employment land, which benefits from the allocation in the wider LDB 2. So there isn't any conflict. In the interim, there is obviously an operation of those premises, and so in terms of other amenity impacts, there is a recognition within the report that there is potential for noise, so no dwelling houses can be occupied until mitigation measures for that in the form of a 2.5 metre fence and a 30 metre standoff from that locality, so that will preserve amenity. But just to clarify, there would be no interaction of vehicular traffic between the 2 uses.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. Councillor Wilson?
Convener, thanks for that, and thanks to Mr. Scott. My second question reflects back on Councillor Anderson's point, and that's where I came in on the meeting about landscaping and the maintenance of that and the issue of trees. That's one that we've discussed at committee quite extensively, and I think there's still a case to be made for that, the conditions to be put in that the Council retains a certain degree of control over that in the future. But when we come to the formal debate on the matter, I'll raise that again. Thank you.
Thank you. So you don't wish a response from the Planning Department on that, Councillor Wilson?
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And that brings us to Councillor Drysdale. Councillor Drysdale, could you ask your question, please?
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to return to the issue of the health centre provision locally and perhaps ask Mr. Smith to pass further comment, as I think he was keen to do in respect of Councillor Purvis's first question. In particular, I just wanted clarification because my understanding was that whilst there have obviously been difficulties in recent times in respect of individual planning applications, that in actual fact NHS Tayside did respond to the consultation in respect of LDP2, and I just wanted clarification on that, please.
Mr. Smith, can you give clarification on that?
I'm not aware that they've responded in relation to LDB2 and made specific comments in relation to the site. In fact, it's the opposite that I'm aware of. But the fact is that they were consulted on LDP2 within which this site was allocated. They made no adverse comments. So should there be any impacts on their operations and how they would serve this development, then that would be for them to absorb, and we couldn't seek any developer obligations in relation to that.
Thank you. So I was just wanting to be clear, though, that there was a response, a consultation response in respect of LDP2.
I'm just going to come in there. I'm going by memory, and I'm sure there's gaps in that. But my understanding for LDP2 was that they had made an overall comment, but it doesn't actually apply to specific applications. But I am going by memory, and I'm happy to be proved wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, councillors, that is the end of the list on the chat. But I'm just going to ask again, are there any further questions based on the debate so far? No. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to ask for a motion. Do we have a motion regarding the application before us? Well, I'm going to come straight in before anyone else does. I'm going to approve the application. I'm going to approve it as is, basically, as the local councillor. I know that this development and this site for development has been discussed at great length within the community. The changes and the developments and the advancement along the Broich Road has made a massive difference to Crieff. The Aldi development that has newly opened, the Aldi shop, has revitalised a part of that area with the schools. The junction that the council did, the Broich Road junction coming down from King Street, and Burrell Street is a fantastic example of the generation and regeneration work at the bottom of Crieff, and this is the next step. I'm delighted to see that the affordable housing is put through the whole of the site. I think that's a very positive step in comparison to other applications that have come forward. I like the mix of housing. I think it is done very well, and I think that with the additional work going on, this will make a massive benefit towards the people of Crieff and Strathearn and the surrounding communities. So I am happy to put forward the motion as it stands, and I believe, based on the details on the chat here, that Councillor James, you're happy to second. Councillor James.
Yes, convener, more than happy to second your motion. Crieff's a growing town. I think, considering the work that's gone on at the bottom end of Crieff, where this development's planned, you've got the shops, the schools, and this constitutes a well-needed part of the settlement. I'm more than happy to second your motion.
Thank you very much. Do we have any amendments? No amendments. Okay, then in that case, this would be carried. But I do know that Councillor Wilson has a concern regarding the green. Sorry, beg your pardon. There's wee pings kept coming up on my ear. It's quite distracting. The Councillor Wilson is concerned regarding the green spaces, etc. And we have spoken in the past about adding the line to the satisfaction of the planning department to condition regarding green space. And I just wanted to state that I was also happy for that to go in if that would help the situation. Councillor James, are you happy with that?
Yes, more than happy with that, convener. I mean, Councillor Wilson usually comes up with something that is proved right in the long run. But
okay.
More than happy to do that.
Thank you. Fine.
Convener,
So,
I don't want to move an amendment at all, but I'm grateful for you mentioning the subject. I think on page 44 of our papers, conditions 8 and 9 would be strengthened by the appropriate wording, particularly because landscaping has been mentioned, and I realise I did come in a wee bit late on the discussion, but in the time I've been in the meeting, landscaping has been mentioned by at least 4 councillors, including yourself and now Councillor James. So I think it would be appropriate to include the usual wording of to be maintained, the landscaping to be maintained to the satisfaction of the council as planning authority, and I think it will give some assurance to both the members of the council who will inherit the situation eventually, and also the local people, that there is an ultimate control that the council have got over it. I thank you for mentioning the matter.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We have other councillors that would like to make a comment. I was just going to open it up for comments. I'm thankful to Councillor Gray and to Councillor Anderson for using the chat box to do that. So if we could start with your comment, Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I've got to say, I do think this is a very attractive site. The transport network within it and onto Boyce Road is, to my mind, very satisfactory. I do like the idea of the spine road drifting through it, not interfering, not creating areas where speeding may be a problem. It's very much, it winds its way through, serves everyone, but also the link roads, they're a key part which avoid the need for vehicles to reverse in and out of these things, which can be a real hazard in many developments. We have areas where lorries, etc., must reverse if they're picking up rubbish. And this is avoided by these little link roads, and that was a good move. I think that came after consultation, after the previous conditional, the first approval. And just, I think the layout is good. There's lots of tidy landscape. Amazing that so many houses are put into this compact area, yet we have green spaces and some vegetation separating various parts of the development. And I just think it's a good development. I'm very happy it's in the right location for Crieff, with the schools and new commercial development nearby. It's just an ideal place which will minimise traffic using Crieff. Crieff is such an area, is a town which is developed with lots of commuters, and here we are with development, business development and residential development nearby, cutting out the need for transport, and that's a very good aspect of this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Yes, I'm just going to add that I know that the planning department worked very closely with the developers to bring in changes and amendments to this, and I appreciate that. As one of the ward councillors, I appreciate that greatly. Councillor Anderson, your comment, please.
Yes, I'm going back to the trees. I wasn't wanting to put an amendment in, but I did notice that Mr. Scott had said that it's possible that we could have a recommendation, maybe, that the crown lifting and cutting back of the trees could be done. I would strongly recommend that, because I have had constituents in other areas where developments has went ahead, and a few years down the line they have issues with overhanging trees in the gardens and threats to the property with gales, etc., with dying and rotten limbs. So I'm very concerned about that. The rest of it I have no issue with. I think the developer and our planners has done an excellent job, but the only concerns I have, and I think when Councillor Wilson was looking at the condition that is basically to ensure that the trees are protected from the actual construction. I'm more concerned with the tops of the trees and what impact they'll have on the houses later on. So that's basically where I'm coming from.
Which I understand, and if it is to the satisfaction of Perth and Kinross as a planning authority, then I'd like to think that that takes into consideration all the what we would consider the standard, whether that be topping or roots, etc. So hopefully that will be covered in the additional line. Councillor Braun, your comment.
Thank you, Convener. I really just wanted to echo your comments regarding the affordable housing. So often we've seen sites where affordable housing is congregated together, and I always feel that gives a sense of them and us. But in this instance, it's been spaced out throughout the whole site. I think that's a good thing to see, and it's in line with the spirit of the council's own affordable housing policy. So I'd like to recommend that design on that basis. It's a good way to see affordable housing spaced out. So that was my real comment. And also to mention, it's a pleasure to see that we are now starting to condition for electric vehicle charging points to be placed on sites. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Councillor Lane, your comment.
Thanks very much, Convener. Councillor Braun has stolen my thunder. It was along the affordable housing line. I was extremely pleased to see it and to see it spread throughout the site. I think that's the way forward, so I welcome that. My only concern is that we monitor strictly the increase in traffic flow and take any mitigating measures. I put in a sufficient number of crossings as the site develops. So apart from that, I think it's a very good plan coming forward, and you can tell that it's been. It looks as though the developers have worked closely with our department to come up with such a good-looking scheme.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for that. That's the first application that we've gone through. The motion is now carried, and we'll move on to the second one. And I appreciate everybody using the chat box. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're now moving on to the second application in front of us today, which is in Auchterarder. Mineral extraction and processing, including alterations to vehicle access, erection of ancillary buildings, landscaping, reinstatement of associated works phase 3 in part retrospect at land southwest of Arns Farm in Auchterarder. And I would like to ask Mr. Smith to speak to the report.
Thank you, Convener. Hopefully everyone can hear me clearly. And I've just wanted to, before proceeding to the slides, note that at paragraph page 65, paragraph 62, the word extant should be replaced by previous. So that was indicating that there was a valid planning permission in place, which is not the case. The previous permissions over a number of years expired a while ago, and that's what this application is actually seeking to regularise. But onto the application itself, planning permission is sought for continued mineral extraction and processing, but also includes alterations to the existing vehicular access, erection of ancillary buildings, landscaping, reinstatement proposals and other associated works, all at Kinross Quarry. If we look at the stills, the first image there is a 1 to 25,000 plan, and from that plan we can see that the application site extends quite significantly. It's 21.77 hectares and is located between Aberystwyth and Auchterarder, although on the south side of the A9, but north of the Glasgow to Perth rail line. The second slide shows the current basic operations, and it's effectively a modest sand and gravel quarry operated by the applicant, dating back to 2002, when a 5-year permission for sand and gravel extraction as part of a wider farm diversification project that also included forestry, conservation and public access elements was approved. Since then, a series of further permissions have extended operations for prolonged sand and gravel extraction until July 2014, although, as we've mentioned there, works have continued since then, and this application seeks to regularise the situation, although it now also proposes a move towards sandstone extraction. The next slide. This slide, once it loads up here, is the proposed master plan. It shows the full extent of the proposals, and they're all outlined in paragraph 6 of the report, but I can summarise that as further sand and gravel extraction, sandstone extraction thereafter, a phased restoration and reinstatement, improvements to the existing road access junction, and erection of associated buildings and compounds, as well as improvements to those that are there at the minute, together with a final reinstatement and access plan. The existing quarry area is outlined in red, and that contains a site compound with cabins, storage containers, a weighbridge and associated car parking, together with areas of sand and gravel extraction, processing and associated silt holding areas. So that's the ponds. The wider site, which is the blue line, includes a farm access road, established woodland, ponds, access tracks and areas of further agricultural land. Access to the site is from the B8062, which is immediately to the west, with further agricultural land beyond. There's enclosing woodland to the north and west. This screens the quarry from the A9 and also from the A-class road to the north. To the south is the Stirling to Perth railway line, from which the quarry is visible, with further agricultural land beyond. Further to the southeast is the Ochil Hill Special Landscape Area. Then to the east is further agricultural land, some of which is within the ownership of the applicant. We'll now move on to some photographs, just to give you a bit of context. So this first photograph is the existing compound and cabins located in the northwest corner of the quarry, adjacent to the access from the B8062. The next photograph is the same, but in the opposite direction, showing the full extent of that area of compound. The next photograph is the partly restored northwest meadow area. Now that's what it will become. Works have been undertaken there to regrade and put soils and things in place in recent months. On the master plan, this is Area 1 marked in green. The next slide. So this is facing south across Area 4B, showing existing drainage ponds. The Perth to Stirling Railway is located in the distance, and then the Ochil Hill beyond that. The next photograph. So this again also shows Area 4B and a pond, together with a farm access which serves the farm known as the Arns. That's a farm located to the northeast. The next photograph. This is the existing access from the B8062, and you'll see the condition of that at the moment. Significant improvements of that are to be made, and there are conditions related. Photograph 7. This is a panorama taken from the Western Hall Road. It shows sand and gravel extraction areas. The proposed sandstone extraction area is to the right, so that's the area of sort of light brown grass at the moment. Next photograph. This shows the northeast corner of the quarry facing southwest and showing the farm track and sand and gravel extraction areas again. And the final photograph. This shows the approximate location of the 3 sandstone extraction pits, which are marked on the master plan 5A to 7, and that's facing in a northeast direction across towards Aberystwyth. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for the presentation. We have had a couple of requests for questions, so I would like to go first to Councillor Gray and then to Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gray, could you ask your question, please?
Thank you, Convener. They relate to the sandstone extraction, which is not normally on this site. It's been sand and gravel, which tends to be digger work. Sandstone extraction seems to involve what they call benched phase pecker working. Could someone explain exactly what that is, in fact?
Yes,
Mr. Smith,
yes,
yes, please, thank you.
Typing my A into the comments there.
Yes, thank you.
It'll take a while, obviously, to get used to this process. Jamie was a little bit better than I am, perhaps. Well, a bench, Councillor Gray, is the platform area in which you would be working the material. So you would form a bench. It's a cutting within that sandstone. A pecker is the machine which is used to peck out these blocks of sandstone, which would then be transported elsewhere for processing.
Yeah. Can I continue now?
Absolutely. Of course.
Yeah, and the cutting process, it's really dependent. What's the stuff to be used for? Is it for rough work or is it for ornamental use? Because cutting can be a noisy process. That's perhaps the point I'm getting at.
Yeah, in terms of, I'll take the 2 parts of that then. In terms of noise, there's been a noise assessment submitted and that's been looked at, and there are conditions related In terms of what the eventual market for the product would be is dependent on the market wants at that time, but having discussed the issue with the applicant's agent, it would appear that the material would be suitable for both of the options that they presented, whether that be ornamental, decorative sandstone, whether that be for cladding buildings, building walls, etc., or as a fill material where a more substantive base or foundation was required.
Okay, thank you. But the noise issue will be carefully taken care of, I take it.
Yes, we've looked very carefully at that, and the positive of this is the containment of the site, but also the lack of properties that are in proximity to it, and that is discussed in quite detail in some of the submitted documents. We've only summarised it in the report, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Councillor Wilson, a question with a question mark. Are you not sure whether you want to ask a question, Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to let you know I could find the question mark as well.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, your question, please.
Thanks, Convener. I had 4 questions, but Councillor Tom Grace raised the first one about the sandstone. First point is do we consider there sufficient topsoil and subsoil on site to provide us with?
Councillor Wilson, we seem to have lost you.
Yeah, we might have lost them for a second there, but I can.
Sure.
I
You would
got
like to answer that?
Just of that first of the 4 questions, and again, that is something that is presented in a lot of the documentation that's in. They anticipate that they should have sufficient soils to do the majority of the works, but have indicated that where that is not the case, that they would import inert materials from elsewhere. There is a bit of discussion on that in terms of the impacts it would have on vehicular movements, etc. So they may have enough for the majority of works, but they might require to get some other materials from elsewhere.
Thank you. There was a senior moment when it all disappeared there, Convener, but I managed to retrieve it a lot quicker than other times. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I got the gist of your reply is yes, but they might need to bring more material in. Second question is in relation to timescales, because often mineral extraction is dependent on market forces, and there's a fairly limited period for this. Do you think we have sufficient conditions that will allow us to keep control over that? Because it is possible the applicants could come back and ask for an extension. I'm particularly keen to see the sand and gravel stuff, which is a normal, as Tom Gray said, the normal type of extraction that's carried out here because of glaciation, basically. It's quite unique to have sandstones near sand and gravel, but do we think that we've got enough conditions in this to keep control over this development?
I'm certain that we've got enough conditions to deal with this, and if they wanted to work out with the timelines associated, then they would require planning permission for them. We have worked very extensively with the operators of the site to get to where we are, and it's, in my view, a very good proposal in front of us. They are, though, going to be moving away at this point. That's their business model from the sand and gravel. One point on the sand and gravel operation, that is, as you say, the more common approach here, but it results in a significant increased tonnage to what would be the case in relation to the sandstone extraction. So they're effectively winding down the vehicular movements associated to it, but moving towards a more lucrative product production.
Thanks for that, Convener. Final questions, and it's covered on page 71, amongst other things, about surface water, particularly things to protect the Perny, I think, Perny burn and also the Ruthven water, which are extremely important water courses in the area. I know there's been discussion on that, that's in the report with appropriate authorities, but are we content that the proposals that the developer has for protecting the water courses is sufficient?
Mr. Smith.
I'm just sorry, I was just trying to unmute my mic. I was doing it too quickly. So I was having a senior moment there as well. Yes, the expert advice given to us is that all the approaches that will be taken are in line with the appropriate practices. So we are confident that that's the case. Councillor Wilson, thanks for your question.
Thank you. I also know that Mr. Stewart is also happy to add to that. Mr. Stewart, if you would also like to make your point.
No, I think just make the point that the series of ponds will slowly, gradually filter out any material that's put into them from the works. So there's not been any issues that I'm aware of from the site historically. So the system seems to be working fine.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, are you happy with that?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, we have 3 more councillors asking questions. They come through in the order of Councillor Waters, Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Reid. Councillor Waters, could you please ask your question?
Thank you, convener. Just a bit confused with the stone processing side of it. Part of the proposal is a stone processing and preparation building, but within the travel section of the site, which is item number 100 on page 70, it says that the sandstone will be quarried and loaded onto HGVs for processing by customers elsewhere. Can one of the officers please explain to me, is the processing happening on the site, or is it being moved, or is it just part on the site and then moved? Thank you.
Mr. Smith, I believe you're answering that question.
Yeah, what that's really referring to is there's a difference between processing for its end use and processing enabling it to be transported. So an example perhaps would be that when you're removing the material, that you have a block that cannot fit into a truck. So it will need to be broken down, and there are processes associated to that. So it would be rough finishing to enable it to then be transported to an end user who will then finish it for their purposes. Different size of blocks will also be sorted, etc., so that again it can be sent to the appropriate party depending on their requirements.
Okay, happy with that.
Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, you're next, sir.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, my question is relates to the permission was granted in 2001 initially, and from 2001 to 2014, the operations has been within the control of the council. Has the applicant, if it was the applicant at that time, completed all the restoration, etc., that would be expected through these applications? Has all that been done and landscaped?
Mr. Smith,
Yes,
so, thank you.
No, as you will appreciate, the planning permission lapsed in 2014, and yes, technically the site should have been restored at that point in time, anticipating that it was no longer operational. However, it's continued to be operational, so there are areas of the site that are still being worked, although not at this point in time given the current situation. So complete restoration has not taken place. We could perhaps refer back to some of the photographs. It is ongoing as and when areas are worked and completed. So there are areas which have been restored. If you see the master plan there, area 1 to the north is an area that's previously been worked has been restored. So it's been ongoing. There's been restoration undertaken when things get to that stage, but they have continued to operate without the benefit of planning permission. We've been in discussions with them on that for quite some time and have made it clear as to our dissatisfaction. We have been monitoring the site as well, and our officers have been down there. They are doing things in line with other regulatory purposes, so we have not served stop notices, etc., upon them because we've been comfortable that there is not any significant environmental harm.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, I'm just going to add. Councillor Anderson, before you come in, that actually, knowing the way this has gone, we would love to be able to go back retrospectively and do things, but we can't. Now that we actually have this with planning permission, or hopefully we'll have with planning permission if this goes through, we have a position where we are now as a council able to control more things than we were previously. So I think I just wanted to comment that it is beneficial that we have we've got that planning application forward in front of us today. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, another question I should have said as to the hydraulic braking, which is the proper name for a pecker, the hydraulic braking of the sandstone. Is there going to be any noise monitoring in any of the adjacent properties for this? Coming from a plant background and agricultural background, they make a fair bit of noise, and I would like to think that nobody in the proximity gets upset by this operation.
I believe Lynn Reid would like to answer the question, so could I pass it over to you, please?
All parts of the process with regards to noise were included in the noise impact assessment. So all predictions were made at the closest residential properties, and in light of that, it was determined that there was no further mitigation necessary.
Okay, thank you. Henry, are you happy with the answer?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to be, if there is an issue, it'll have to be reactive then, because as I say, I appreciate unless technology has come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years, a hydraulic breaker makes a load of noise when it's on an excavator of that size.
Okay, thank you. We now move to Councillor Reid. Councillor Reid, your question, please.
Yeah. Hi, sorry about that. Again, muting. This is obviously a live site, and I'm just wondering how the fact that it is a live site will impact on the required road improvements which have been put in as suggestions. And is there anything being put in place to try to mitigate the increase in the heavy goods traffic through Abriven and Auchterarder? I know most of the traffic seems to be going north, but the Abriven residents will be quite unhappy about that. And that brings it on to, is there any interaction with the potential Shinnefoot junction? Just wonder if that's in the agenda. Final point is also the question is the assurance, along with Councillor Anderson saying, at the end of this, are we getting really hard, fast assurances that it will be put back as a recreational activity area? Because that will be great.
Okay, by my understanding of that, Councillor Reid, there was a few questions, some from traffic, which I believe Lachlan McLean will answer. So if we could start with those.
Thank you, convener. With regard to vehicle movements, at the moment there are currently 16 existing vehicle movements, and that's predicted to increase to 18 over the next year and a half. And then once the works for the sand extraction reduce, the future HGV movements will decrease to 2. So hopefully in the future the residents in Aberystwyth will notice a difference in the decrease of vehicles traversing through their village. With regard to the works at the Shinnefoot junction, we don't anticipate that the quarry should have any impact on the future works at Shinnefoot, and that work could go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Smith, I believe you have answers to some of Councillor Reid's questions.
Yeah, in terms of the restoration programme, that is the intention. The phasing programme indicates that there will be recreational opportunities and various pieces of infrastructure. Additionally, there is an interpretation building there that will be available for programmed visits, both to look at the operation of the quarry, but thereafter that will be retained and will be there as a facility going forward.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Lane who would like to ask a question.
Thanks, convener. It's a bit unfortunate that the site has operated for 6 years without planning permission, and I was wondering if their predictions that they may cut down the movements if they move to the sandstone completely. There's no way we can put a condition to enforce that they move to sandstone production and come down in the gravel. Sand and gravel production to make it that the movements actually are reduced. I'm also concerned about the state of the road, that they continue to operate with the junction as it was. It doesn't look suitable. So I don't know if there's any conditions we can put on about how they do their business in line with what the plan is here, bearing in mind that they've operated for 6 years without planning permission.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll ask Mr. Smith to answer that. But as I say, this application has come forward now, and that, if we're minded to agree, it would allow us a lot more ability to discuss and to hold the feet to the flames, so to speak. But Mr. Smith.
Yes, it's obviously unfortunate, and we've been aware of this for a long time. We have been monitoring it for quite some time and have had a close working relationship with them. It's taken a long time to get to where we are because of the detail and complexity of the proposals that are before us. And actually the first element or the first phase that's to be undertaken is the improvements to the junction there. That was at the time considered acceptable under the previous planning permissions, but now we feel that an improved facility is required there. So there would be lead-ins to that junction, resurfacing and reorientation undertaken, and that would be the first thing that was undertaken as part of the planning permission if that was to be granted. In terms of the sand and gravel operation and the sandstone, our assessment and the advice is that the level of movements etc associated can be accommodated, and so it's not our intention to say you must no longer extract sand and gravel beyond the next 2 years, which is their business case at the moment, and then only undertake sand and gravel, only undertake sandstone extraction. We would be comfortable with both if that was necessary, but their intention and their stated objective in terms of their business operation is to move to the more lucrative sandstone workings.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lane, you okay with the response? To answer your question.
It answers the question, but there's no certainty in any of these statements, so that's where being substitute in this committee, I find it difficult to understand that may or may not happen.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Okay, there are no more questions being put through on the chat, so we will move to a motion. Do we have a motion for this application?
Convener?
Certainly, Councillor.
Sorry, I didn't have time to type a message. I'm content to move the report as indicated. I think we've had a good set of questions about a variety of issues, and clearly these things always have a local concern, but I'm content we've got sufficient conditions to allow the planning service to monitor this development, and hopefully the vehicle movements will reduce considerably over the next few years, and I think we have control over that, and also that we'll return to what is going to be a kind of biodiversity site of some type, and eventually when there'll be a phasing to that. It'll be interesting to see how that, I didn't say much about the sandpipers, but it'll be interesting to see how they thrive when the activity diminishes, and hopefully it will become something that will be a credit to the area and something for folk to visit in the new world that none of us know very much about at the moment. This might actually be a site where people will go for recreation and allow habitat development. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I'm taking these in order. We have Councillor James, who was first to ping up to second the motion. Councillor James.
Thanks, convener. I'm happy to second the motion. I did that because I didn't think anybody else was going to at one point. But yes, and again, I'll echo everything that Councillor Wilson has said, and also the thing that I like it is the fact we're giving control back to our officers again. It's good to have a site where our officers have worked closely with the applicant, but now actually have the ammunition to actually do something if they need to. So more than happy to second this.
Thank you very much indeed. We have an amendment, I believe, from Councillor Gray.
Sorry, convener. Apologise for that. I think I wasn't aware I stuck an amendment. Never mind. I put an A.
Well, no, an A. Well, A could be answer, or it could be amendment. I wasn't sure. So, do you have a?
It was regarding second. I'm quite happy to leave it at that. It's been seconded.
Lovely, thank you. In that case, it doesn't seem as if we have an amendment. I will open it up to comments. Councillors, do we have any comments?
Yeah. Can I comment?
You can indeed, Councillor Gray. Thank you.
Taking up on Councillor Lang's points, I know sand and gravel quarries are very difficult to monitor simply because they're dependent on demand. And Ochterard, there has been big demand recently, and I was aware for a time there was lots of trucks in and out of the various sites very locally. And this comes and goes, and it will come and go again for a few years, I would imagine. The actual monitoring of it, as I say, is very difficult because it's dependent on what the user demands at that time, what stage they're at in the development. But the important thing is when these phases are finished and we get to the stage of the rock, that we do keep an eye on exactly what's happening, because Councillor Anderson is correct. I'm quite sure this will be a noisy process, more noisy than anything that's happened here so far. So as a local, and I'm sure Councillor Reid will be aware as well, we will keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Councillor Illingworth, you have a comment. Councillor Illingworth?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with the noise element, given that you've got the A9 right next to the site and the railway to the south of the site. It would have to be pretty noisy to outnoise the A9.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I will just ask one more time, do we have any further comments? No, nothing's coming forward. Then in that case, the application is approved. Thank you very much indeed. And that will now take us on to the third item today. I'll give it a second. Yep, there we go. Okay, so this is in Bankfoot. It's the formation of a borrow pit, vehicular access and track, storage yard and car parking, siting of auxiliary processing equipment, 2 portable buildings for office and canteen use, and associated works for a temporary period. S42 to modify condition of 9 hours of operation, which was on permission of 18-00395 to land south of Loke Farm in Bankfoot. Before we go on to that, I see we have a couple of people that would be interested or are interested in a comfort break. As I'm trying to do this as normal as possible, I'm happy for that, but we really want to make sure that it is a short comfort break. So 5 minutes maximum. Is that okay? Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, we will have a 5-minute break. So in that case, I expect us all back and ready and raring to go at the latest 25 to.
We all say switched on, even me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So the session will stay live, members. Just to let you know, we will have cameras and microphones disabled, and we'll just have the slide on the front screen at the moment. So if you are away, if you can ensure your microphones are muted meantime, thank you.
Okay, everybody, I make that 25-2. I'm hoping we're all back. Can I just ask Mr. Henry, do we need to do a roll call again to go through that process?
Convener, no, I can check through Teams that everyone is back and present.
That's lovely. Thank you. That helps a lot. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So I'll just read that again. Brings us on to the third application for in front of us today, which is in Bankfoot. It's the formation of a borrow pit, vehicular access and track, storage yard and car parking, siting of auxiliary processing equipment and 2 portable buildings for office and canteen use, and associated works for a temporary period, S42, to modify condition of 9 hours of operation for permission on 18.00395 to land south of Loke Farm in Bankfoot. And I'd like to ask Mr. Scott to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. Given the nature of this proposal, I'm going to show 2 stills only for this application. The first of which here is just to confirm the site location plan and to confirm its extent. It's approximately 16.9 hectares of former agricultural land located at Loke Farm. The site's approximately 1 kilometre south of Bankfoot Village and just over 3 kilometres north of Luncarty. The material being won from the site supplies only the Luncarty to Passive Burnham section of the A9 dualling project, the boundary of which is immediately to east of the application site. Taking you now to the second still. This just confirms the extent of the operational site. So just to summarise, the proposal is actually a modification of condition. The extant permission is allowing for the extraction of 400,000 tonnes of sand and gravel already on the site, which commenced in early 2019, and it was approved in December 2018. This application seeks only to modify condition 9 of the existing permission to extend the hours of operation for the extraction to extend from 6 AM in the morning, Monday to Saturday. The recommendation for approval reflects this change to condition 9 and further a minor change to condition 13 for the inclusion of noise controls for dwellings which are near proximity to the site. All other planning conditions which cover matters relating to extraction controls, environmental, restoration and access, vehicle, lighting and noise operation are carried forward as part of the recommendation before you. Thank you. That concludes the stills for this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. I'll ask officers if we have any questions regarding the changes to the amendments on this, changes to conditions on this application. I'll give it a wee second, see if anyone comes forward. Okay, I'm assuming that there has been no messages or put forward on the chat, that means there are no questions regarding this application. So do we have a motion? Nobody wants to do that either. Well, I'm happy to. Oh, Councillor, we have a few, and now they come through. Apologies. We'll go back a step. We have Councillor Lane who would like to ask a question. Councillor Lane, I will take it over to yourself.
Thank you, Convener. I think the confusion was because you asked officers to come forward with a comment, not councillors. So that's why we're so slow on the uptake there. So
my apologies. I don't know where that came from, but okay.
No, it's fine. No, I was just wondering if officers could explain why the developer is now wanting to operate from 6 o'clock when we gave planning permission less than a year ago to operate from 7 o'clock in the morning, and when I was actually at some of the community council meetings where Breedens came along and there was no mention of 6 o'clock. So I was wondering what has changed in the if there was what had changed to wish them to do that, because I do know that some of the traffic is going through the outskirts of Bankfoot and turning up onto the A9, and I think that's what the community council, not objection to it, was just a comment that we need to have that strictly enforced, the condition of which way the traffic can actually travel at the site. So I was just looking for some comment from the officers, please.
Okay, Mr. Scott, would you like to answer that question, please?
Yes, Convener, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Ling. So in the original proposal, it had been anticipated as part of their contract for supply that the hours stated from 7 AM Monday to Saturday would have been appropriate. However, as the project's developed over time, the contract has been asked essentially to supply asphalt for a longer period of time just to ensure continuity of the construction works. So the hour extension would facilitate that. So it's a change that wasn't foreseen at the time of the original application. It's just very much keeping up with the demands of the project as it's ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, the timing of this is interesting because all at 11:38 we had 3 councillors stating they were happy to do the motion. I'm just going to go for the top one on my list. So Councillor James, you are happy to put the motion.
Yes, and again, I press for all the right reasons. I take Councillor Lang's point about this being brought up at community councils. This is within our ward, and I was quite happy to go with this when it first came to planning committee, and likewise I'm more than happy to stand up and be counted a community council if there's an issue with an extra hour. With the uncertain times we're in at the moment, I'm sure that they'll be wanting to play catch up with the building of this important road, and I wouldn't like to see anything prevent that from happening. So I'm more than happy to grant the permission for this.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Anderson, you wish to second?
Yes.
If you could, yeah, if you could just that's you. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Anderson, you're still on mute. If you could just unmute your microphone, that's us.
Yes, happy to second this. Normally 6 o'clock in normal times, I would have reservations, but because the situation we're in, and because I think it's a priority that the A9 gets constructed as soon as possible, especially for once we get out of this dark tunnel, that we want our tourism and that to come back, and I think improvements to the roads will make a big difference to this. So yes, happy to second this.
Okay, I will ask, do we have an amendment? No, there is no amendment to the application, so we're opening up to comments. Councillor Wilson, I believe you have a comment.
Thanks, Convener. Just reflecting on, first of all, I support the approval of this, and I take the points about timing and the necessity to get on. We've all wanted the A9 to be dualled, and the expressions breaking eggs and omelettes springs to mind, Convener, but there is an issue that Councillor Lang referred to, and he'll be much more familiar with it along with Councillor James, about traffic turning on what is the main road, and it isn't totally relevant to the 6 o'clock, but 6 o'clock expands the time when the traffic will be there, obviously. Are we content that we've got sufficient controls of speed on the road and sufficient monitoring that the contractors are doing what they ought to be doing? Because there's a huge amount of lorry movements on this section of the road in particular, mainly because they're going to the quarry site. So just to ask, and I'm sorry, maybe I should have asked this during questions, but it was Grant Lang's comment that kind of stemmed this in my mind, that are we content in approving this, we will be okay with road safety?
We have actually had a motion and a second, Councillor Wilson, yep. And I do understand that's a question. It's one of those awkward situations where to get you an answer would be difficult.
I made the comment and I'm not expecting a reply. Okay.
Thank you very much. Then we will take it as a comment, Councillor Wilson. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any other comments on the application? Second. No, in that case, the application is approved. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so that brings us to the last item of business in front of us, which is a proposal of application notice, a PAN by any other name. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to mention it. I'm going to state that this is, to me, where the whole of the planning process starts. It's the point of looking at public engagement. It's about getting out there. It's one of the most important parts of the whole process to me. So this is an erection of replacement primary school and associated works. Now, as with these, we don't obviously have any question and answer session. It is purely for councillors to raise any particular pieces of interest that they would like the planning department to take notice or recognizance of when the application process goes through. So councillors, do you have any comments for the planning department to take take note of for this application? Please notify me in the chat box. Councillor Gray, thank you very much indeed. Could you mention your comments or concerns for this application?
Well, I did inquire if there were any concerns locally on this, and the only local concern that was brought up was that any naming of a new school should not be North Muirton Primary School. It should be some sort of combination, perhaps, between Balhousie and North Muirton. I don't know. But the point I'm raising it is, if I know at the moment it doesn't say, it just says replacement primary school. It doesn't say what it's replacing, but it is on the site of the North Muirton Primary School. And I would not like to think that the agreement reached by Education Authority to see that it was not named North Muirton is not tarnished by any drawings or reference to it as being North Muirton in the next processes before it's finally approved, because it's quite liable to slip in somewhere and it's called North Muirton Primary School. Just to be sure that it doesn't and remain as vague as it is at the moment, just a replacement primary school yet to be named. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Oh, sorry, just fighting with my mute button there. Thank you, convener. Just a quick request combined with a question, I think, of the primary schools that I observe through my patch and beyond. It seems that we simply can't provide enough parking for bikes, scooters, anything else that kids decide to come to school on, maybe tricycles. So just wanting to feed that back to officers that the more the merrier when it comes to parking provision, with maybe rain covers on it to encourage more of that sort of active transport to schools. I'm sure it would already be in there, but just to feed back, it seems to be constantly full at every school I get to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just similar to the last application for a school that came through, I just asked that we, look at ensuring that the building has a proper passive house principles and standards with the development, that there's a high insulation, airtightness. We've seen a number of schools now getting built more down south, where their energy efficiency is 80 to 90% lower, with long-term cost savings involved with that. They also lead to better environments for the kids and help for their well-being for the students, and they also help with our climate emergency obligations, where we are leading by example and ensuring that our schools are built for the future, and as well as the cost savings that brings long term. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I think I found the microphone. Thanks, convener. On paragraphs 24 and 25, I would want the headings emphasised about travel to school patterns and green transport plans. I'm using that kind of old-fashioned terminology, but travel to school plans anyway, and also road safety, because there's going to be a larger number of kids going to the school. It is in a residential area, but there's still road safety issues, and I think these items were relevant before the pandemic. Given whatever the new world is going to look like, they will be even more relevant in relation to to traffic and children going to school in the future, if they could be added in, please.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, thank you, convener. Yes, I'm looking at the plan here, and I would imagine that the new school will have a larger footprint. And I would like the officers to look carefully that the drainage issues, I mean, we can all build in there and raise the level so that the school doesn't get flooded, but it's the impact on the properties round about, who has had a history in the past of flooding. We do have new flood prevention there, but however, the school's going to be up for a long time, and we need to ensure that it doesn't impact on properties in the area, which I still think have problems getting insurance, etc., with flooding. So I think we need to be very careful how we plan the drainage in this development.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, I'm just going to ask again, is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment or a concern regarding this application? No. Then that brings us to the end of Perth and Kinross's first virtual Planning and Development Management Committee. I want to say a massive thank you not only to the councillors for coming forward and doing everything they've done and engaging so well in this format. I think it's been great, but I also want to say a massive thank you to everybody behind the scenes, not only to the planning and development team for making sure that all the slides and everything and bits and pieces could be as clear as possible, but also to all the IT guys and everybody that's behind the scenes in management and just making all this work. I think it's been done exceptionally well, and I think everybody deserves a massive round of applause, but I'm not asking anyone to do that. But thank you very much indeed, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Yes, and if the scheme test is successful,